One simple act of kindness, giving up a seat on a crowded flight, set in motion a chain of events that would change Darius's life forever. What began as a selfless gesture would lead him into a world of unexpected friendships, deep emotions, and the power of trust. When Darius gave up his first-class seat to a pregnant woman, he never imagined the profound impact it would have. What seemed like a small act of kindness would soon entwine him with Grace and her family in ways he couldn't have predicted. As they faced the weight of secrets and danger, Darius discovered that sometimes the right choice can change everything. Will his decision ultimately lead to redemption for them all? Before we journey further into this unforgettable story, make sure you're subscribed to Epic Story Moments. Hit that bell icon now so you never miss an incredible tale. Join our community by liking, sharing, and commenting to keep these heartwarming stories coming. And hey, tell us where you're watching from. We love connecting with you all. Darius boarded the plane that morning like any other traveler, ready to embark on a journey for work, unaware that a single moment of compassion would transform his life forever. A reserved man, Darius often kept to himself, carrying the weight of years of quiet resilience. His first-class seat, earned through tireless effort as a data analyst, symbolized a milestone in his career, a testament to his mother's unwavering belief in his potential, even when the world doubted him. As he settled into his seat, a sense of accomplishment washed over him. He pulled out a well-worn book, eager to immerse himself in its pages, when a soft commotion caught his attention. A visibly pregnant woman stood in the aisle, her expression fraught with fatigue. Her husband hovered beside her, looking equally distressed. The two scanned the cabin, their eyes betraying a silent plea for help. No one moved. The other passengers avoided their gaze, buried in their own comforts. Darius felt a pang in his chest. He thought of the woman's discomfort, the cramped space awaiting her in economy, and the strain it would put on her body. Without hesitation, he stood, gently tapping her shoulder. "Ma'am," he said softly, his voice kind but firm, "please, take my seat. You need it more." The woman stared at him, stunned. Her husband began to protest, but Darius shook his head with a reassuring smile. "It's okay," he insisted, retrieving his backpack. "I'll be fine." The flight attendant, who had been watching the exchange, stepped forward, helping the woman into the seat. The passengers nearby murmured in quiet surprise, but Darius paid no mind. He made his way to the back of the plane, finding the only available seat, a cramped space between two other passengers. Though the conditions were far from ideal, he didn't complain. The hum of the engines and the view from the window were enough to calm his thoughts. When the plane landed, Darius expected nothing more than a quiet exit. But as he stood in line for coffee, he was approached by the pregnant woman's husband, Tom. With a warm handshake and a sincere smile, Tom expressed his gratitude. "You don't know how much that meant to us," he said, his voice tinged with emotion. "My wife, Grace, has had complications with her pregnancy. What you did made all the difference." Darius nodded modestly, brushing off the praise, but Tom insisted they exchange numbers. Though uncertain if anything would come of it, Darius complied. The two parted ways, and Darius headed to his meeting at a prestigious firm, ready to pitch his company's proposal. In the conference room, Darius presented his ideas with precision, the culmination of years of hard work and preparation. Halfway through, the door opened. To his astonishment, Tom entered, now dressed in a sharp business suit. "Sorry to interrupt," Tom said, addressing the room. "I wanted to personally sit in on this meeting. The man presenting today showed extraordinary kindness to my family during our flight. I believe his integrity speaks volumes about his professional character." The executives exchanged intrigued glances, the tension in the room easing. Tom's presence carried weight, and his endorsement seemed to shift the mood entirely. Darius, bolstered by the unexpected support, delivered a flawless pitch. When the meeting concluded, Tom approached him with a handshake and a grin. "You've got the contract," Tom said, his voice filled with conviction. I trust a man like you will deliver nothing less than excellence. The weight of the moment hit Darius as he left the building. A simple, selfless act had not only changed someone else's day, but had opened doors he never thought possible. That evening, as he called his mother to share the news, her voice echoed with pride. "You've always had a good heart, Darius," she said, "and the world needs more of that." The story of Darius's gesture soon became a testament to the power of kindness, a reminder that even the smallest acts can create ripples of impact far beyond what we imagine. Darius, now a symbol of quiet strength and generosity, carried the lesson forward, determined to lead with compassion in all that he did. Darius entered the conference room with a calm determination, masking the nervous energy bubbling beneath his professional exterior. The room's silence was daunting, punctuated only by the faint tapping of a pen against the table. Two executives sat before him. An older woman with a piercing gaze that seemed to dissect every move, and a younger man whose neutral expression gave nothing away. He pushed aside his nerves, channeling weeks of preparation into his pitch. Every data set had been memorized, every possible question anticipated. As he explained the scope of what his company could offer, he noticed fleeting signs of intrigue flicker across their faces. But halfway through his presentation, the older woman leaned forward, her sharp tone cutting through the air like a blade. "What makes you think your team can handle this project? We've spoken to a lot of firms, many with more experience than yours." The unspoken challenge in her words hung heavily between them. Darius took a measured breath, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "You're right," he began, his voice steady. "We're a younger firm, but our team is diverse, innovative, and proven. We've delivered measurable results for organizations like yours by blending fresh approaches with reliable data analytics. We're nimble, adaptable, and focused. What we lack in years, we make up for in dedication and personalized attention. Something larger firms tied to old methods can't provide." He allowed a small, confident smile to touch his lips, but her skeptical expression remained. Before doubt could creep in, the younger man spoke, acknowledging the strength of the data Darius had presented. A flicker of hope ignited within him as he delved deeper into projections and strategies. Gradually, the executive's guarded expression softened, replaced by cautious approval. When the presentation ended, both stood and shook his hand with polite promises to be in touch. Though their responses were non-committal, Darius left the building with a sense of accomplishment. He hadn't stumbled, and that alone was a victory. As he stepped into the bustling city street, the hum of life around him felt oddly distant. He turned on his phone, noticing 2 missed calls from an unknown number. Moments later, a text lit up his screen. Asterisk, "We'd love to treat you to dinner." Asterisk, the message was from Tom, the man he'd met during the flight. Darius hesitated, rereading the text. The invitation felt unusual, but something about the gesture resonated. Work trips were often lonely, and the prospect of genuine human connection felt like a rare reprieve. Replying with a simple, "I'd be happy to join," he received a prompt response with an address and time. That evening, Darius arrived at a cozy bistro tucked away from the main avenues. The warm glow of its lights and the soft hum of jazz music emanating from within created an inviting atmosphere. Outside, Tom stood waiting, waving him over with a friendly smile. Grace, standing beside him, exuded warmth despite her visible exhaustion. She walked carefully, her hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly, but her demeanor carried a sense of calm resilience. Inside, they chose a corner table, a quiet spot perfect for conversation. As menus were handed out, Grace leaned forward, her voice soft yet brimming with sincerity. "I don't think I truly thanked you," she said, her eyes shimmering with gratitude. "That plane ride was longer and harder than I expected, and I was at the end of my rope." Darius shrugged, his humility evident. "I'm just glad I could help." Tom chimed in, his tone reflecting a mix of appreciation and disbelief. "You saw how nobody else even moved. It made us realize how rare kindness can be. The conversation turned more serious as Grace exchanged a glance with Tom. Taking a deep breath, she began, "We know this might sound strange, but there's something we'd like to discuss with you." Curiosity piqued. Darius nodded. "I'm listening." Grace explained that her father had recently passed, leaving behind a tangled legacy of financial accounts linked to his import-export business. The details were murky, and the spreadsheet she had uncovered hinted at mismanagement or worse. "I don't think anything illegal is going on," she added hesitantly, "but my dad trusted the wrong people sometimes. I need to know if someone's taking advantage of us." Tom spoke next, his voice steady but earnest. "We have an attorney, but what we really need is someone with your expertise to make sense of the numbers. We know it's a lot to ask, and we can't pay what your firm might offer. But," Darius interrupted gently, "it's not about the money." He paused, considering their request. Grace's vulnerability and Tom's earnestness struck a chord. "I'll help," he said finally. "Send me the data, and I'll see what I can do." Relief washed over Grace's face, her shoulders visibly relaxing. "Thank you," she whispered, her gratitude palpable. The evening progressed with lighter conversations, baby names, Grace's childhood memories, and how Darius had found his way into data analytics. Despite the occasional glances from other diners, the trio's camaraderie created a bubble of comfort. By the time dinner ended, a sense of connection had formed, unspoken but undeniable. As Darius walked back to his hotel that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was more than coincidence. It was the beginning of something meaningful, a chance to make a difference in ways he hadn't anticipated. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly seen, not as a pitchman or a professional, but as a person whose small act of kindness could ripple outward in ways he had yet to understand. The cold night air brushed against their faces as they exited the bistro together. Grace asked Darius if he needed a ride, but he politely declined, mentioning his hotel was just a short walk away. They parted ways with warm smiles and a shared sense of connection, unaware that their lives were about to intertwine in ways none of them could have anticipated. The next morning, Darius woke to an email from Grace. Attached to the message was a folder containing dozens of scanned documents, ledgers, partial bank statements, and miscellaneous records. Intrigued yet apprehensive, he brewed a strong cup of coffee and settled at his desk, opening the files on his laptop. As he delved into the labyrinth of numbers, a sinking feeling crept over him. Many transactions were logical, but some seemed puzzling. Repeated entries, inflated sums, and sub-accounts that appeared to serve no clear purpose. One phrase kept popping up in the notes: shipping containers. The amounts tied to these records were exorbitant, raising questions about their legitimacy. The deeper he dug, the murkier the trail became. Despite the gravity of his findings, Darius knew he couldn't let this side project derail his primary responsibilities. That afternoon, he headed to a follow-up meeting with the prospective clients from the day before. The younger executive greeted him with a warmer demeanor, ushering him into a smaller conference room. "We were impressed by your presentation," the executive said, extending a hand. "We'd like to meet the rest of your team and set up a conference call next week." Darius's heart swelled with hope. Securing this deal could catapult his career to new heights. As he stepped out onto the bustling city sidewalk, his phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but he answered anyway. "Darius, it's Tom. I'm sorry to bother you, but Grace is in the hospital." Tom's voice was tinged with worry. "She felt dizzy earlier, and the doctor wants to keep her overnight for observation. She specifically asked me to let you know." A wave of concern washed over him. "Is there anything I can do? Anything you need?" Tom hesitated before replying. "No, we're okay for now. Just keep working on the documents if you can. We'll catch up soon." That night, Darius returned to his hotel room, but his mind was restless. He reopened the files, determined to make progress despite his growing unease. His analysis revealed further irregularities. Large sums funneled through obscure accounts, cryptic references to shipments, and a few names that raised red flags. A gnawing suspicion formed in his mind. This wasn't just financial mismanagement. Something darker might be at play. The next morning, Tom called with good news. "Grace is fine," he said, relief evident in his voice. "The doctors say she just needs rest and minimal stress." But Darius knew stress wouldn't vanish as long as her father's financial mystery loomed over them. Fueled by a sense of duty, he redoubled his efforts, scouring local business forums and contacting former clients to piece together the puzzle. The pattern suggested that someone close to Grace's father might have been embezzling funds, or worse, involved in illegal activities. When he met Grace and Tom again at the bistro, the mood was somber. Grace, visibly drained, cradled her belly protectively. Tom fidgeted with his coffee cup, his usually calm demeanor replaced by tension. Darius carefully laid out his findings. "There are consistent anomalies in the accounts," he began. "Repeated transactions, inflated amounts, and some very suspicious names. It's possible that someone was siphoning money." Grace's eyes welled with tears. "Why would anyone do this? My dad wasn't perfect, but he was honest." Tom's jaw tightened. Could it have been someone close to him? A partner or employee? Darius nodded. "It's likely. I recommend taking this to your lawyer. If you trust me, I can keep digging." Grace inhaled shakily, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please do it. We need to know." Darius left the meeting with a renewed sense of purpose, but the weight of their trust bore heavily on him. The following day, he juggled his official work with the side project. During a working lunch with his prospective clients, his phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Tom. Balancing both commitments felt like walking a tightrope, but he stayed focused, knowing the stakes were high on both fronts. After the lunch meeting, he hurried to a coffee shop to meet Tom. The man's expression was grim as he slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were several letters from an unlisted address, each demanding money for unspecified protection services. Tom's hands trembled as he spoke. "We found these in Grace's dad's study. They're threats. If he didn't pay, they'd expose past mistakes." "What does this mean?" Darius's stomach churned. He read through the letters, each more ominous than the last. The language was vague yet menacing, hinting at secrets and leverage. "This changes everything," Darius said, his voice firm. "These aren't just financial issues. Your father might have been caught in something much bigger." Tom nodded solemnly. "We need to find out what, and fast. Grace doesn't need the stress." As they parted ways, Darius felt the weight of the unfolding mystery pressing down on him. He resolved to uncover the truth, knowing it could either vindicate Grace's father or shatter everything they thought they knew. Darius couldn't shake the ominous feeling as Tom recounted the details of the note. His voice trembled through the phone, the weight of fear unmistakable. "Stop asking questions," the note had read, written in jagged, hurried letters. It was clear now. Someone was watching, someone who didn't want them digging further. Darius paced his hotel room, his mind racing through the tangled web of clues. The sealed files, the blackmail letters, and now this threat. It all pointed to something far more sinister than he had initially suspected. His thoughts turned to Grace, who was already under immense stress. He couldn't let this escalate and endanger her or the baby. "Tom, this is serious," Darius said, his voice low but firm. "We need to tread carefully. Whoever's behind this isn't messing around. We can't afford to act recklessly." Tom exhaled sharply. "I know, but what do we do? Grace can't know about this. It'll break her. And I'm not even sure if our lawyer is equipped to handle something like this." He said sealed files could mean there's a legal gag order or worse. Darius nodded, though Tom couldn't see him. "Let me dig further. I'll find out what I can about Clyde Harris and the shipping records. But if things get more dangerous, we might need to involve someone with more authority, someone who can act on the evidence we have." That afternoon, Darius found himself back at the coffee shop where he and Tom had first met. This time, he sat alone, scrolling through the city's business registries and public records. His coffee sat untouched, growing cold as he unearthed tidbits of information. Clyde Harris had a long history in the shipping industry, but there were rumors of financial irregularities and whispers of ties to underground dealings. Most of it was hearsay, but the pattern was enough to raise alarm bells. Just as he was about to pack up, his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. He hesitated before answering, his heart pounding. "Mr. Darius," a deep voice said on the other end. "You don't know me, but I know you've been asking questions about Clyde Harris. My advice? Stop now, before you get in over your head." "Who is this?" Darius demanded, his voice steady despite the chill running down his spine. Someone who's been around long enough to know when someone's poking their nose where it doesn't belong, the voice replied. "Leave this alone, or you might find yourself in a situation you can't talk your way out of." The line went dead before Darius could respond. He sat there for a moment, staring at his phone. The threat was clear, and it wasn't one he could ignore. That evening, Darius met Tom at his house. Grace was upstairs resting, oblivious to the growing storm. Tom showed him the note they'd found in the mailbox. Darius studied it carefully, noting the erratic handwriting and the faint smudge of what looked like oil on the paper's edge. It wasn't much, but it was something. "I think Clyde Harris is our link," Darius said. "Everything points back to him. The shipping records, the payments, and now this note. But we can't go in blind. We need to gather more concrete evidence before confronting him again." Tom nodded, his expression grim. "And if we can't, what if this goes beyond just Clyde? What if we're up against something bigger?" "Then we'll handle it," Darius said, though even he wasn't sure how. "For now, let's focus on what we can do. I'll keep looking into Clyde. In the meantime, you should keep Grace safe. Don't let her leave the house, and don't tell her about the note. Not yet." Tom agreed reluctantly, and Darius left with a heavy heart. The stakes were higher than ever, but he couldn't back down now. Grace and her unborn child depended on him, and he couldn't let them down. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Darius spent hours digging through online databases, making discreet calls, and piecing together the puzzle. He discovered that Clyde Harris had connections to a series of shell companies, each tied to suspicious transactions. The trail led to a warehouse in another part of the city, one that wasn't listed in the official records, but had been mentioned in a cryptic note he found in Grace's father's files. When Darius shared his findings with Tom, they agreed to visit the warehouse together. This time, they came prepared. Tom had hired a private investigator to accompany them, someone with experience navigating dangerous situations. The warehouse was nondescript, tucked away in an industrial district. As they approached, the investigator pointed out several security cameras and a guard stationed near the entrance. It was clear this wasn't an ordinary storage facility. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of oil and metal. Stacks of crates lined the walls, each marked with foreign symbols. Darius's pulse quickened as they approached one of the crates. With a crowbar, the investigator pried it open, revealing a cache of items that sent a chill down Darius's spine. Illegally smuggled goods, including weapons and counterfeit currency. "This isn't just blackmail," Darius whispered. "It's an entire criminal operation." The discovery set off a chain of events that none of them could have anticipated. The private investigator helped them compile the evidence, which they handed over to the authorities. Clyde Harris was arrested a week later, along with several of his associates. The operation was dismantled, and Grace's father's name was cleared. In the aftermath, Darius sat with Grace and Tom at their kitchen table. Grace looked tired but relieved, her hand resting protectively on her belly. "You saved us," she said softly, tears glistening in her eyes. "I don't know how we'll ever repay you." "You don't need to," Darius replied. "I did what anyone would have done. I just wanted to make sure you and the baby were safe." As he left their house that evening, Darius felt a sense of closure. He had stepped out of his comfort zone, risking everything to help a family in need. And in doing so, he had found a purpose greater than himself. A reminder that sometimes, doing the right thing means facing the darkness head-on, no matter the cost. Darius felt a storm brewing in his chest as Tom's voice trembled on the phone, recounting the ominous note. The message was blunt and unnerving. Stop digging or else Grace, already under immense stress, was shaken. Without hesitation, Darius reassured Tom, "I'll come over right now." He quickly dressed and hailed a rideshare, determined to protect his friends and uncover the truth. The neighborhood where Tom lived was quiet, its tree-lined streets glowing under the soft morning light. Tom's modest home stood invitingly, but the tension inside was palpable. Grace met Darius at the door, her exhaustion evident. She handed him the note, her hands trembling. Typed in block letters, the words carried a cold, calculated threat. "I'm scared," Grace admitted, her voice barely above a whisper as she sank into an armchair. But what can the police do with so little evidence? Tom paced the living room like a caged animal. "We can't stop now. Whoever is behind this wants us scared. We have to keep pushing forward." Darius knelt beside Grace, his voice steady but laced with concern. "I'll keep looking, but we have to be careful. No more unplanned visits to warehouses. Let's gather proof first." Grace placed a protective hand over her growing belly. The baby's frequent kicks reminded her of the life she was fighting for, a beacon of hope amidst the turmoil. Darius promised her he would tread cautiously, balancing his investigation with his professional obligations. Days passed in a blur. Darius poured himself into his work, finalizing the details of a major contract. When the confirmation call came through, the elation was bittersweet. His firm had won the deal, a milestone in his career, but his thoughts remained tethered to Grace's predicament. Without hesitation, he decided to extend his stay, informing his boss of personal matters that needed his attention. One evening, over a simple dinner at Tom's house, they revisited the puzzle pieces. Darius's sharp eyes scanned the documents again and again, searching for any overlooked clue. He voiced his theory about an insider orchestrating the blackmail. Grace mentioned an old business partner of her father's, Ronald, who had left abruptly years ago. Tom nodded. "I remember hearing about Ronald. Your dad always said they had a falling out. Do you really think he'd resurface now? After all these years?" Darius shrugged, the uncertainty gnawing at him. "If there was a grudge or unresolved business, it's possible. We should try to find him." By the next morning, Darius had tracked down a lead, an address for a Ronald Fletcher in a worn-down part of the city. He and Tom drove across town, the unease thickening with every mile. The address led them to a dilapidated apartment complex. They knocked on the door, unsure of what to expect. An older man with thinning hair and wary eyes answered. When they mentioned Grace's father, his expression softened, tinged with nostalgia. "He's gone," Ronald said quietly, stepping aside to let them in. The apartment was cramped and smelled faintly of musty books. Ronald eased into a tattered armchair, motioning for them to sit. His gaze held a mixture of regret and caution. Tom got straight to the point. "Someone is blackmailing Grace, and her father's finances are in shambles. We're trying to figure out who's behind it. We thought you might know something." Ronald sighed deeply, his shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. "I left the business because I couldn't stomach some of the deals your father was making. He started trusting Clyde Harris, and I warned him Clyde was trouble. But he wouldn't listen." He paused, his hands trembling slightly. "Clyde was involved in smuggling, precious stones, maybe worse. Your father believed Clyde's lies, thought it was all legitimate. I walked away when I realized the truth. We had a falling out, and I never looked back." Darius leaned forward, his heart racing. "What do you know about Clyde's operations?" Ronald's gaze drifted to the dusty window, his voice heavy with remorse. "Clyde thrives on intimidation. If he's blackmailing Grace, it's because she's too close to something he wants to keep buried. Maybe it's about the finances implicating him. Or maybe he just doesn't want anyone poking around. Tom pressed on. Did my father-in-law know about the blackmail? Ronald shook his head. I doubt it, but he did call me a month before he died. He was panicked, talking about securing everything. I told him it was too late. Clyde's grip was too strong. The room fell silent, Ronald's revelations painting a grim picture. Darius finally asked, "Would you help us gather evidence? Grace doesn't deserve to bear the brunt of this." Ronald hesitated, the conflict evident on his face. "I'm old, and this was so long ago. But if it'll help Grace, I'll try. We parted on bad terms, but I don't want her to suffer." They exchanged contact information before leaving. As they stepped into the chilly evening, a sense of dread hung over them. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, but the image they revealed was far from reassuring. Darius clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. The stakes were higher than ever, but he wouldn't back down. For Grace, for the unborn child, and for the truth, he would see this through, no matter the cost. The weight of the revelation pressed heavily on their shoulders. As the truth unraveled about Clyde Harris and his alleged smuggling network, the enormity of the situation dawned on them. The blackmail letter Grace received was only the tip of a dangerous iceberg, and now they were sailing straight into its depths. Grace sat in her living room, staring at a framed photo of her late father on the mantel. The man in the photograph looked serene, his gentle smile a stark contrast to the dark truths emerging about his business dealings. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "How could he get involved in something like that? He was a good man." Darius's voice was gentle, steady, as if he were trying to hold her world together with his words. He might not have known the full extent. Clyde could have lied to him, or maybe he trusted him. Either way, we'll uncover the truth, Grace. We'll be careful. Grace nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "This is so overwhelming," she said, her voice cracking under the weight of her fear. Determined to take the next step wisely, they decided to consult Grace's attorney, Leonard Pearson, a man known for his sharp mind and calm demeanor. Leonard listened intently, his expression growing more alarmed as they recounted Clyde's actions and the mounting evidence. "Clyde Harris is not someone to be underestimated," Leonard said gravely. "I suggest we hire a private investigator. Someone discreet who can dig deeper and build a case solid enough to involve the authorities when the time is right." Darius volunteered to be the point person with the investigator, poring over data he had compiled and sharing it with Leonard. As they parted ways, Grace placed a hand on his arm. "Thank you, Darius, for everything." Her gratitude was palpable, and Darius offered a reassuring smile. "Sometimes," she added softly, "we just need someone to care enough to help." The following weeks were a blur of tension and anticipation. Grace's due date loomed closer, each day a bittersweet reminder of the joy she should be preparing for, overshadowed by the fear of Clyde's next move. Tom became hypervigilant, watching for any suspicious activity near their home. Once, he bolted outside to confront a car that had been idling too long, only to find it belonged to a neighbor's friend. Darius, meanwhile, balanced the weight of his professional obligations with the personal mission he had taken on. His phone buzzed constantly with updates from the private investigator and inquiries from his firm. Despite the mounting pressure, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing he was making a difference. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. The investigator uncovered a critical lead. Clyde Harris had an associate with a known history of intimidation tactics. The associate's name matched a partial signature on the blackmail letters. It wasn't ironclad evidence, but it was enough to take to the police. They met with a detective, a seasoned professional who listened carefully as they presented the financial documents, threatening letters, and the investigator's findings. The detective's expression hardened as the pieces fell into place. "This is serious," he said. "We'll investigate further. In the meantime, stay vigilant. Don't engage directly." The involvement of law enforcement brought a sliver of relief, but the tension in the air remained thick. Then, one evening, Tom's panicked voice crackled through Darius's phone. "It's Grace. Her water broke early. We're on our way to the hospital." Darius's heart leapt. He rushed to the hospital, finding Tom pacing the waiting room like a man on the edge of a cliff. Grace was in the delivery room, surrounded by nurses, her face a mix of pain and determination. Hours passed like lifetimes. Finally, a nurse emerged with a smile. "You can see her now. The baby is fine." Relief washed over them like a tidal wave. Inside the room, Grace cradled a tiny bundle, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. The baby's eyes fluttered open briefly before closing again, her presence a beacon of hope in their darkest hour. Tom kissed Grace's forehead, his voice choked with emotion. "You're amazing," he whispered. Darius lingered near the doorway, hesitant to intrude on their family's moment. But Grace looked up and beckoned him closer. "If you hadn't given up your seat on that flight, I might not have made it here in time. You've done so much for us, Darius." "Thank you." The baby, a little girl, was their new beginning, a reminder of life's resilience even in the face of adversity. In the days that followed, Grace focused on caring for her newborn, while Tom stayed close, his protective instincts heightened. Darius continued to check in daily, offering support and bringing small comforts, like Grace's favorite tea. They avoided discussing the investigation in front of the baby, but the shadows of Clyde's threats were never far from their minds. Then came the breakthrough they had been waiting for. The police raided Clyde Harris's warehouse and uncovered a trove of incriminating evidence. Smuggled goods, falsified shipping records, and documents tying Clyde directly to the blackmail. Arrests were swift, with Clyde and 2 of his associates taken into custody. The relief was immense. Grace and Tom could finally breathe, knowing the immediate danger had passed. But the victory was bittersweet. Ronald, Grace's father's former business partner, called Darius with a trembling voice. "Someone claiming to represent Clyde threatened me. They said if I keep talking, they'll come after me." Darius's voice was firm. "Stay calm, Ronald. I'll contact the detective. Don't answer any unknown calls. And if you feel unsafe, call the police." As he hung up, a familiar dread settled in his chest. Clyde's reach might have been clipped, but the ripples of his actions were far from over. Still, for the first time in weeks, there was hope. Grace and Tom invited Darius over for dinner, their gratitude shining brighter than words could express. As they sat together, the weight of their shared journey lifted, if only for a moment. The road ahead would be long, but they had faced a storm and emerged stronger. For Grace and her family, the fight for justice wasn't just about righting past wrongs. It was about building a future where their daughter could grow up unburdened by the shadows of the past. And for Darius, it was a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary acts of courage come from simply standing by the people who need you most. Darius sat in the cozy living room of Grace and Tom's home, the atmosphere warm with quiet celebration. Grace cradled her newborn daughter, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. Tom stood nearby, holding a glass of sparkling cider, his face a mixture of gratitude and admiration. To Darius, Tom said, his voice steady but emotional, "For your kindness, perseverance, and willingness to stand by us even when it wasn't your battle." Darius, taken aback by the heartfelt toast, felt his face grow warm. "I just did what anyone should do," he replied softly, his humility shining through. The 3 clinked their glasses gently. The baby stirred, letting out a soft whimper, and Grace instinctively began to rock her, humming a tender lullaby. Darius watched the scene unfold, the vivid memory of the day he gave up his first-class seat for Grace flashing through his mind. How had such a simple decision led to this moment? A few days later, it was time for Darius to leave. He packed his bags, his heart heavy yet content. Professionally, he had achieved what he'd come for. But what truly mattered was the bond he had formed with Grace and Tom. As he stood by the door, ready to say goodbye, Grace hugged him tightly. "Thank you, truly. she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You'll always be welcome in our home." Tom extended his hand, gripping Darius's shoulder firmly. "Safe travels, my friend, and please keep in touch." Darius nodded, promising he would. As he climbed into the waiting taxi, he glanced back at the house one last time, the image of Grace, Tom, and their baby etched into his mind, a portrait of resilience and newfound hope. At the airport, he moved through the terminal with a mix of nostalgia and relief. His ticket was for first class this time, a reward from his boss for landing a big contract. As he boarded, he scanned the crowd, wondering if anyone might need the seat more than he did. But no one seemed in distress, so he settled into his seat, a quiet sense of pride filling him. As the plane soared into the sky, Darius stared out the window, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He thought about Grace's courage to confront the truth, Tom's unwavering support, and Ronald's eventual redemption. He remembered the tension, the fear, and the small victories along the way. Despite the chaos, there was a silver lining. Grace's father's name could now be cleared. Her baby would grow up free from the shadow of Clyde Harris's schemes, and justice had been served. Reaching into his bag, Darius pulled out the battered novel he had carried for weeks. This time, he read its lines with a renewed perspective, realizing how much he had changed. Life's chapters didn't always unfold as expected, but that didn't mean one should stop turning the page. Back home, Darius returned to work, where he was met with praise for his exceptional performance. Yet something had shifted in him. He began to notice the small moments where help might be needed and found himself drawn to acts of kindness, not for recognition, but because it felt right. He stayed in touch with Grace and Tom through messages and occasional calls. They sent him pictures of the baby, wide-eyed and curious, growing a little each day. Grace's voice sounded lighter, free from the weight of fear that once burdened her. Months later, the trial against Clyde Harris began. Grace testified courageously, recounting her father's integrity and the blackmail threats that followed. Ronald, too, provided valuable insights into the schemes Clyde had orchestrated. Darius wasn't called to testify, but he supported them from afar, ready to help if needed. The evidence against Clyde was overwhelming, and his conviction brought an end to the fear that had loomed over Grace and her family. When Grace called to share the news, her voice was filled with relief and joy. "It's finally over," she said, tears of happiness mingling with her words. "We can truly move on." "I'm glad," Darius replied, his voice steady yet emotional. "You all deserve peace." "You deserve thanks," she insisted. "Not just for the seat on the plane, but for everything else you did. You believed in us when it was hard to believe in ourselves." "I'll never forget that." Darius felt a lump in his throat, humbled by her words. "I just did what felt right," he said simply. Life moved forward. Grace and Tom built a stable future, their baby thriving in a world free from shadows of the past. Darius flourished in his career, but he carried with him the lessons he had learned. Small acts of kindness, he realized, could open doors to unforeseen challenges and incredible rewards. Though the journey had been unexpected and fraught with obstacles, it had left a lasting mark on him. As he turned the pages of his own life, Darius knew he would always carry with him the power of connection, the importance of courage, and a belief that even the smallest gestures could lead to profound change. Darius sat in the warm, cozy living room of Grace and Tom's home, the air thick with a sense of peace and fulfillment. Grace cradled her newborn daughter, the baby's steady breath a reminder of the fragility and beauty of life. Tom, standing by her side with a glass of sparkling cider, wore an expression of deep gratitude, the kind that spoke volumes without a word. "To Darius," he said, his voice unwavering but filled with emotion, "for your kindness, your unwavering perseverance, and for standing by us when you had nothing to gain, but everything to lose." The toast caught Darius by surprise, and he felt the warmth of humility rise to his cheeks. "I just did what anyone would do," he replied quietly, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had learned more about himself through the kindness he had shown than any accolade or praise could ever offer. They clinked glasses gently, a shared moment of unity. The baby stirred in Grace's arms, letting out a soft whimper, and Grace, with a gentle and practiced hand, rocked her daughter to sleep while humming a lullaby. Darius watched in awe, the simplicity of the moment striking him deeply. He thought back to the day he had given up his first-class seat. How such a small act of kindness had grown into something so much more. The chance to make a difference had started with one decision, one simple gesture. Days later, as Darius packed his bags to leave, his heart was full. He had come to help with business, but it was the personal connections he had made that left the greatest impact. He stood at the door, ready to say his farewells. Grace embraced him tightly, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered, her words tinged with the unspoken bond they had formed. "You'll always be part of our family." Tom, with his characteristic strength, gripped Darius's shoulder firmly, his eyes sincere. "Safe travels, my friend. Please, don't be a stranger. Keep in touch." Darius nodded, promising he would. As he climbed into the waiting taxi, he took one last look at the house. The image of Grace, Tom, and their baby remained in his mind, a portrait of resilience, of hope rebuilt through shared struggles and unexpected kindness. At the airport, Darius walked through the terminal with a mixture of nostalgia and pride. His ticket was for first class this time, a reward for his hard work, for the success he had achieved in his career. But as he made his way to the boarding gate, his mind couldn't shake the thought of the people he had met along the way, especially Grace. He boarded the plane and settled into his seat, scanning the crowd, his heart searching for a moment to repeat his earlier kindness. Yet no one seemed to need him this time. He sat back in his chair, a quiet pride filling him. As the plane ascended into the sky, Darius gazed out the window, deep in thought. He thought about Grace's courage in the face of truth, Tom's unwavering support, and Ronald's eventual redemption. He remembered the tension, the fear, and the quiet victories that had carried them through it all. Darius reached into his bag, pulling out the well-worn novel he had carried for weeks. This time, as he flipped through the pages, he saw them in a new light, his life, the struggles, the decisions. It wasn't just about the big moments, but about the quiet changes, the unseen shifts that brought him closer to the person he was becoming. Back home, life continued. Darius threw himself back into work, where his career flourished, but something within him had shifted. He found himself noticing the small moments, the people who might need a little kindness. It wasn't about recognition. It was about doing what felt right. He started volunteering at community centers, inspired by the realization that a single genuine gesture could change lives. He kept in touch with Grace and Tom, exchanging updates and pictures. Her daughter was growing, learning, thriving, a testament to the strength of the family they had built together. Grace's voice, once heavy with fear, now held a lightness to it, and every time they spoke, Darius felt the warmth of their shared journey. Months later, the trial against Clyde Harris began. Grace testified courageously, recounting her father's integrity and the years of blackmail she had endured. Ronald, too, provided invaluable testimony, revealing the depths of Clyde's manipulation. Darius, though not called to testify, stood with them in spirit, ready to offer his support whenever they needed it. When the verdict came, it was clear. Clyde Harris was guilty. The weight that had burdened Grace and her family for so long was finally lifted. When Grace called to share the news, her voice was thick with tears of relief. "It's finally over," she said, the words a balm to her soul. "We can finally move on." Darius felt the lump in his throat, overwhelmed with emotion. "I'm so glad for you," he replied, his voice quiet but filled with sincerity. "You deserve peace." Grace's words lingered in his heart. "You deserve thanks," she said, her gratitude palpable. "Not just for the seat on the plane, but for everything you did. You believed in us when we couldn't believe in ourselves." "I'll never forget that." Darius was quiet for a moment, humbled by her words. "I just did what felt right," he said, his voice tinged with the kind of humility only true kindness can bring. Life moved forward, and Grace and Tom built a future free from the shadows of the past. Darius thrived in his career, but the lessons he had learned about kindness, trust, and the unexpected power of one gesture shaped him in ways he never imagined. He realized that small acts of kindness could ripple outward, touching lives in ways no one could predict. The journey had been challenging, full of unexpected turns and obstacles, but it had also left a lasting imprint on him. As Darius turned the pages of his own life, he knew that the power of connection, courage, and even the smallest of gestures could create profound change long after the story had been told. And so, he carried forward, never forgetting the lesson Grace had taught him, that kindness, once set in motion, could change destinies in ways no one could ever predict. As Darius continued his journey, he carried with him the knowledge that even the smallest act of kindness could change lives. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales of hope and transformation.